to welcome Malgorzata Stankiewicz. Please join me in giving her a warm round of applause. So I'm going to introduce Malgorzata briefly, and then we'll talk about her book. She's here to discuss her latest book, Lassen, published by Meta Books, by Delphine Bedel, who's over here. Malgorzata is a Polish artist, but she lives and works in Zurich. And this is her third book. After her previous book, Cry of an Echo, which won the Unseen Dummy Book Award, dealt with the topic of a primeval forest in Poland. And her latest book also deals with the forest, but in an extremely radically different way. So we can see maybe some images from the book now. The first question I'd ask is, when you see the book in the first instance, and even the title, there's almost no kind of information. You have no idea really what you're looking at or what to expect. So how did you kind of decide to take this approach to the project, and what can you tell us about what the project is about?
So I have to say, all my books so far, it's not even that I'm deciding, it's a process that I'm in, and it just grows from me being somewhere, reacting to the nature, to the landscape. Then my practice is all film-based, so I spend a lot of time in a dark room experimenting, and with the previous book and with this book the same. It was while I was printing, I started to see this body of work as a book. I guess the reason why the book, or I try not to influence the viewer before he experienced the book, is because I would like everybody to take a look for themselves. I think the book deals with the current climate crisis. I feel like this is something we all can relate to. But I also wonder, do we relate enough? And with this book, I also would like to raise this question. And the same with the title. I wanted to leave it somewhat ambiguous. Lassen, it's in fact a national park in the Northern California, where I took most of these photos. But also Lassen in German. I live in Zurich, so German is a language that surrounds me. Lassen is a very interesting and ambiguous verb because it changes its meaning depending on in what context it is used. But nevertheless, it can mean to leave, to let go, to let be. And I feel this also, in a sense, relates to the question and to the topic of the current climate crisis, and there, people trying to find different approaches, and I am still trying to find the perfect one.
So my next question is a two-part question. Would you say this is a book about climate change? And also, there's a huge tradition in photography of what was, we would call the engaged photographer or the concerned photographer. And that was done in a much more, let's say, traditional documentary way. But do you feel some relationship to that tradition with a project like this?
So first part of the question, if the book is about the climate crisis, yes, it is my response to the climate. It's something that I think about from the moment I wake up until the moment I go to sleep, practically not all the time, but almost every decision I make that involves consuming or traveling or anything, shopping, it's at the forefront of my consciousness. So it's just natural that it also is in my practice. So it is about climate crisis. It's also about my personal reaction to the climate crisis. And the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was your relationship to this idea of the concerned photographer or the engaged photographer, and whether you consider this book to be, an invitation to action, for example.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I feel, first of all, as a concerned human being, and and because I'm a photographer and artist, it translates. And definitely, so I can maybe explain a bit about the structure of the book, of the photos. So after the previous book, where I worked with black and white photographs, and the prints I made were all unique silver prints, which were very small. This time I wanted to try working as large as I could, and also in color. So I photographed all these images on an expired slide film, and then I kind of was like, okay, I have all this film. What do I do with it? Normally, you have it processed by a lab, but I'm very interested in materiality of the medium, so I proceeded to try to develop the films myself, and that was the first layer of the alteration that started happen to the original material. And then again, once I developed the films, I thought, what do I do now? Normally, you have the color prints printed with a machine, but again, I like to do things by hand, so I decided to try doing it by hand. And I wanted to make large prints, but then I realized the paper I had at hand was too small. So I decided to try to cover my area of printing with different elements of paper. And I ended up with these fragmentary prints. That's why there are all these lines. And it made me think again of how ultimately photography is showing only a fragment of what's surrounding us. The same, it seems like, up until today, we have, especially in terms of climate crisis, we have been thinking in this very fragmentary way and not taking the whole planet into consideration. So I wanted to translate this nature of the prints further into a book. And that's when I was then at the process of printing the previous book, so I was on press and I saw press sheets, and I had this idea, what if I printed the whole image as one press sheet and then cut and bound it? So it reflects this fragmentary nature of work, but it also invites us and invites the viewer, hopefully, to have another look. So maybe when you flick through the book quickly, you don't realize that the images are actually not matching unless they are in a spread. And again, it made me think of how we look at images today and how often we look on them on our phone and they're only fragments and we don't always pay attention. So with this book, I hope to actually slow the viewer down and make them kind of start to dissect the pieces and maybe try putting them together.
And you can see here the insert on the right, which contains the list of the 23 works that were used to make the book.
24, yes.
24. Mm-hmm. And we've seen a selection of the spreads from the book, and what's clear is that there's a really abstract quality to these images. We're dealing with textures and materiality, not so much visual content. And so I know you worked with the designer Brian Paul Lamotte on the book.
Yes.
So how does one go about sequencing a book like this that is made up so much of these elements? How do you develop a rhythm? How do you create that book structure?
Right. So actually the sequencing was still part of my process. So it was actually something I did by myself because as I said, I was thinking of a book while I was printing and in the darkroom. So I feel the book is still very much continuation of my process, and especially with such an abstract work, it could be sequenced in any way possible. And I felt that as an author, only I could make a sense of it in a way that felt that still represented my vision. So that's how the sequencing happened. And Brian has helped me tremendously with the whole insert. It's actually inspired by vintage national park maps in the United States, so it follows the same format. And it was his idea to kind of incorporate this format. Also, because the booklet actually serves as a map to the book in a way. You have a book and you can just experience it, and then you can read the text, and it helps you navigate and maybe make more sense of the book.
Yeah, I think that you experience the book the first time in a very different way once you have kind of read the insert, read the texts, and got these pieces of information from that. So, do we have a question from the audience? Yes. Did expired film have a big impact on making the images? In the appearance of the images?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, with the film, with the paper I had, it was probably 15 years old, so it was not possible to actually print any white surfaces because everything was yellow, and that again kind of made me think of the parallel between the two topics. But it wasn't only in expired film because I ran out end paper, so I had to buy some new one, which is where which allowed me to kind of vary the color palette.
Okay, unfortunately that's all we've got time for now, but Malgorzata is going to be signing copies of the book at Polycopy at the Tipeee bookshop stand at 3 o'clock this afternoon. So if you want to get a copy of the book and speak to her more, you'll have the opportunity to do it there. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.